So now we've reached the point in this series where we're really getting into the riches of the English tradition. This is Jane Austen. And for some, there is nobody greater or more important than Jane Austen. And one of the tricky things about this series is that my self-imposed rule is that I'll only have one book per author, so that everyone gets a fair crack at the list, so to speak. And when you get to someone like Jane Austen, if you don't choose Pride and Prejudice, many of the Austen fans will go slightly crazy, because for them, Pride and Prejudice is one of the great Austen novels, which indeed it is. And this is an entirely personal response. Emma is the great novel, the great Austen novel, and I'll explain why. First of all, it's her last novel. She died 2 years after it was published. It's incredibly mature. It has all the strengths, to my mind, of the earlier books. It's set around the life of a 21-year-old girl, Emma, and it's set in a very small location. Austen herself said that she wanted to work in what she called the territory of 3 or 4 families in a country village is the very thing to work on, is what she said. Emma comes out in 1816, and by 1819 Jane Austen is dead, in her 40s. So it's the end. There is no more. And the book itself, although it's a long book, was written in just over a year. So it's written in a white heat, and it has the tremendous momentum of a book written more or less in one breath. And it has the fascinating and exasperating character of Emma at the heart of it. She is very fascinating, and we're drawn into the intimacy of her thoughts, and also into her battle with self-knowledge and her battle with her own vanity. The book is brilliant on so many levels. It's brilliant for its depiction of Emma and the way in which, through a series of revelations, she comes to a greater self-knowledge. It's brilliant for its characters, Mr. Elton, Mrs. Bates, Mr. Knightley, Mr. Woodhouse. These are characters who stand comparison with any of the great fictional archetypes in the English tradition. It's very compelling. It's set in a small location. It has some brilliant lines in it, and in this book, she masters what you might call the art of free indirect speech, which is the way in which the interior thoughts of the protagonists, Emma, are conveyed by indirect speech in the text. It's a clever device which Austen really masters in this text, and as it were passes on to the next generation. But for an Austen fan, there is no greater novel than this one. The other thing about Emma, which is really worth mentioning, is that Austen, although very private and very secluded, she's living in the country most of her life, she published under her own name. She didn't publish anonymously. And she was also very alert to publishing the book well. So she had been published by one publisher for her previous books. And for this one, she makes the point of moving away from her previous publisher to John Murray. Now, John Murray is still around as a publisher. He still exists. But he was Byron's publisher. He was a very big deal in the 1810s, 1814, 15, 16. He was the one you wanted to be published by. And she sent in the manuscript. Murray's reader read it and said, "This is marvelous, we must do it at once." And it came out very quickly. It was sent to one of her biggest fans, who was the Prince Regent, the son of George III. So she's moving in very elevated circles very quickly. And the patronage of the Prince Regent, the Prince of Wales, is very important to her success and plays a big role in shaping the public response. So she's behaving at the time of Waterloo, at the time of the turn of the century, like a modern writer. And her behaviour to me certainly seems like someone who's very, very modern, actually.